What's up, gang? What do you say we talk about King Arthur for a little while? And when I say we, I really mean me, because I cannot hear you unless you shout really loud. Um, Last time, you should have seen a video talking all about this guy here, Merlin, and where he came from, and where his name came from. You should have also learned that his mother was a human and his father was an incubus, a kind of demon, and that's where his magic powers come from. I think maybe the video last time didn't mention the version of the story where his mother had him baptized right away, and that's why he was good despite retaining some of his more demonic elements. You might also remember that we talked about Merlin's deal with King Uther, that once his baby with Igraine was born, that Uther would hand that baby over to Merlin to be taken care of. And, his foster father was Sir Ector, but in T.H. White's modern novelization of the story of King Arthur, we see Merlin educating Arthur and using his magic powers to teach him all sorts of lessons about how having the power doesn't mean that you have the moral high ground, but rather vice versa, that justice and righteousness actually give you strength. And that's the one of the main themes of the Once and Future King, that might doesn't make right, but rather right makes might. And then in the Disney adaptation of the first part of the Once and Future King, called The Sword and the Stone, Merlin's main lessons to Arthur seems to be, wouldn't it be cool to be a fish sometimes? So they went kind of a different direction. But speaking of The Sword and the Stone, when last you saw me, we were talking about young Arthur after he had drawn the sword from the stone. And there had been some unwillingness among the local lords and barons to accept this young boy who they knew nothing about, who, as far as they knew, was the son of Sir Ector, a lesser knight. But Merlin assured them that he was the true king. They saw him pull the sword out multiple times, and eventually the nobles do accept Arthur as their king, thanks to the protests of the common people who throw their support behind the young king. And so eventually the nobles all accept Arthur, who is still a teenager at this time, and that works out better for them, because once they swear allegiance to him, he restores their lands to those of them who had lost their lands since the time of King Uther. And then we also see him appoint his foster brother Kay as his seneschal, which is like the king's chief steward. And then at this time, his other main knights are guys named Bedegraine, Ulfius, and Brastias, none of whom you have probably heard of, because none of them are famous knights of King Arthur. However, and I should point out that, as will be the case most of the time, we're looking at the version of the story as reported, as written by Thomas Malory, whose work Le Morte d'Arthur is one of the most popular and famous compilations of Arthurian legend, who comes relatively late, and he combines elements from Geoffrey of Monmouth, from the French romances like Chrétien de Troyes, as well as the Lancelot Grail cycle, aka the Vulgate cycle, all that stuff. Malory comes after all of that and kind of compiles it all into one. So that's kind of why we're looking at him and what he has to say. So yeah, not all of the nobles supported Arthur. He was opposed by 6 kings at first, most notably King Lot of Lothian, King Uriens of Gore, and King Nentris of Garlet. And these guys are notable because they are all brothers-in-law of each other. They are married to 3 sisters. We will learn about those sisters later on. This guy is notable because the name King of the Hundred Knights is cool, and then there's the King of Scotland, who apparently doesn't get a name at all. Anyway, these kings march on Caerleon, which you can see right here in Wales. Here's Wales. Caerleon, which is Arthur's seat of power at the time. In the earliest Welsh stories, this is where Arthur lives instead of Camelot, and Mallory retains that a little bit by having him live at Caerleon first before he goes to Camelot. And so these 6 kings come and lay siege to the tower where Arthur is with 500 knights who are ready to defy these 6 kings. If you don't know, a siege is like when someone in a city or a castle, something that's defended, usually by a wall. The people are inside, but the attackers are all on the outside, and their job is to either try to get through the walls and get into the city, or to basically starve the people out. They try to wait them out until the people inside run out of supplies. That's a siege, very common method in ancient and medieval times when you have a walled city or a tower or a castle. When you hear about siege weapons like catapults or trebuchets or rolling towers, battering rams. These are all siege engines, the point of which is to try to get across, get over, get through, or break down the walls so you can get into the city. So you have the 6 kings and all of their forces laying siege to Arthur's tower, where he has 500 knights at Caerleon. Merlin tries to kind of nip this forthcoming battle in the bud by going to these kings and saying, actually, Arthur is the rightful king. He is the legitimate son of Uther and Igraine. And what's worth noting is that Arthur, again, still a teenager at this point, doesn't even know that. He doesn't know who his real father is. As far as he knows, Sir Ector is his real father. The kings, however, they refuse to believe Merlin. But Merlin then, using his prophetic powers, the main powers we see Merlin use, shape-shifting, foreseeing the future, right? So here he uses his prophecy. He tells them all about Arthur's great future and how they would do well to try to support him now before he becomes the most powerful man in Britain. The prophecy impresses them enough that they decide that they will parley with Arthur. They'll talk with him. They'll meet with him to have a discussion rather than going straight into battle. Merlin goes to Arthur and says, be firm with these guys, don't let them overwhelm you just because there's 6 of them and 1 of you, because they're older than you, because you've only been a king for a year basically at this point, but be smart about it. And so Arthur goes in ready to stand his ground, but he's still skeptical enough that he wears a double helping of chainmail under his robe just to be on the safe side. However, because Arthur refuses to yield on anything and the 6 kings are jerks, the negotiations break down, they fall apart, the siege resumes. Merlin goes back to the 6 kings, he warns them that Arthur is going to beat them, and then he magically teleports away, which freaks the kings out, and more importantly, lots and lots of their knights who also witness this. Merlin, having teleports in to Arthur and tells him, hey, that magic sword you pulled out of a rock that made you a king? I know it's very fancy and cool. Don't use it until you absolutely need to. You want to save it for the moment when it would do the most good. Shortly after this, 300 knights who were following the 6 kings desert the kings to join up with Arthur. Why? Because they saw a magic man teleport out of their camp, and they said, let's be on the magic man's side. So the battle resumes, and Arthur's doing really great. He's showing himself to be the coolest guy on the field with all the sickest moves, sweet ollies, the 360 no-scopes and everything. But then what happens is King Lot and his dudes make a surprise attack. They catch Arthur off guard. They knock him off of his horse. King Lot has the advantage and is about to strike Arthur. Arthur's bodyguards try to rush toward him to save him, but before they can even get to him, Lot is going to do some damage. And so Arthur realizes this is it. This is the moment. Now's the time. He pulls out his magic sword, which is not necessarily Excalibur. Mallory does tend to use the name Excalibur to refer to the Sword in the Stone, but the Sword in the Stone and Excalibur are definitely two separate swords. So while he might have had two swords named Excalibur, this is definitely not like the famous Excalibur. You can call it that if you want. And a lot of modern things, especially the Sword in the Stone and Excalibur, are made to be the same. That's true in some of the medieval texts as well, but in Mallory, they're definitely two different swords, but even he seems to be confused about it. So anyway, Arthur pulls out his magic sword, which shines brighter than 20 torches. It blinds all of his enemies. And so this is a big advantage for Arthur and his men. And so they start to slaughter the enemy knights, and then the common people who've been watching the battle from the fields, they get so excited they rush in and start beating up the armies of the six kings with clubs and sticks and stuff. And so this battle ends with the six kings' armies running away, and Merlin telling Arthur to just let them run. Don't chase them. You'll see them again soon enough. So at this point, Arthur heads to London, which you may have heard of, London, England, to hold a war council. And there Merlin warns Arthur and his allies that King Lot and his 5 other kings have now been joined by 4 more kings and a duke, bringing their alliance up to what they call the 11 kings, but one of them is not really a king, but okay. You can look at these names, but none of them are important. Sorry to any clairvoyants of Northumberland stands out there. None of these guys matter. Okay. Merlin says that because his enemies are now even more powerful than they were before, what he needs to do is go to Gaul, aka France, and find the kings Ban and Bors, who are currently in the middle of fighting their enemy Claudius. And Merlin says if you go and help them, they will help you in return. And so Arthur sends some of his knights, and Ban and Bors agree to help them. They come back to England, and Arthur throws a big party for them. And then Merlin goes out to recruit more guys. He manages to gather 15,000 troops for Arthur. Merlin is so notably persuasive. I imagine there's probably some magic backing up his regular arguments, but he gets 15,000 guys for Arthur, especially once they know that Ban and Bors are on Arthur's side. They might have been more reluctant to just join a teenage boy king trying to take on 6 kings from older kingdoms around the British Isles, but once they know that the 2 powerful French kings are on Arthur's side, they join up. Arthur goes out on his own to recruit, and he doesn't do too bad. He gets 2,000 guys, 10,000 guys, I should say, 10,000 guys of his own. So Arthur and his army now prepare to meet the army of the 11 kings at the forest of Bedegraine. So now the 11 kings are not only still mad that there's a king that they believe is an illegitimate king on the throne, now they're double mad because they want to get revenge for getting beat up at Caerleon. So Merlin continues to give advice to Arthur, the main thing that he does, and he tells him that Arthur should make a midnight sneak attack. And so what happens is, in the middle of the night, Arthur and his guys sneak into the enemy camp, and while the enemies are sleeping in their tents, they just start stabbing their swords through the tents and just killing as many dudes as they can before the camp notices and wakes up. Doesn't seem super fair, but that's how they did it. And the 11 kings, however, were not among those stabbed in their tents, so they survive. They jump up, they manage to escape and regroup elsewhere. So Merlin has another piece of advice for Arthur. He says, the 11 kings don't know that you have brought these two powerful kings from France with their armies. What I would suggest is that you hide Ban and Bors and their armies in the forest while you go and face the 11 kings head on, so they don't know what your true strength is. So at this point, the 11 Kings' armies vastly, vastly outnumber Arthur's forces. It's a huge difference, and so the 11 Kings are super confident. Nevertheless, Arthur and his men fight very hard, they fight very valiantly, and they do manage to fight the 11 Kings' enormous army to a standstill until basically both sides are completely worn out, exhausted, they can't fight anymore. Then Arthur and Merlin signal for Ban and Bors to bring their armies out of the forest, and from Ban's army from one side, Bors' army from the other side, and they surround the exhausted army of the 11 Kings with completely fresh troops who have been just chilling under some trees for a while. Obviously Lot and the 11 Kings get wrecked completely, and Arthur might have wrecked them permanent, except that Merlin stops him and he's like, think about how many people have already died. Tens of thousands of people on your side, on the other side. If you keep fighting, fortune's going to turn on you. The kings are going to win. You have the upper hand now. Let them go. All right? And Merlin says, if you stop fighting now, they'll run away, and there will be peace for 3 years. And he explains that the reason for that is, what the 11 kings don't know is that while they have been fighting and attacking Arthur in his lands, their own lands have been invaded by Saracens. Saracens are Arab Muslims who, in this case, would be invading. You can see them here in this Italian ad for extract of meat. Who knows? But yeah, here you can see some Saracens. This is pretty anachronistic, because if we understand, if we understand Arthur to have lived at the time that Geoffrey of Monmouth says he lived, he lived before Muhammad was even born, and so probably there would not have been invading Muslims at the time. However, for Mallory, who lived in the 1400s, this would have been contemporary, because, he lived after the Crusades had happened, which would have made the Saracens, Muslims, Arabs loom very large in the European imagination. And also, Mallory kind of lived at the tail end of the Muslim occupancy of Spain before the fall of Granada at the end of the 1400s. So for him, Saracens would have been a very real threat. For Geoffrey of Monmouth, for a post-Roman Britain Arthur, if that's what we're still believing he was, they would not have been a thing. But anyway, the 11 kings have found their lands occupied by invaders while they were gone, and they're going to spend several years dealing with that. So Arthur divides his spoils with King Ban and King Bors, without whom he could not have won. And then now Arthur has gained some renown because of his success at the Battle of Bedegraine. And what happens is many nobles, noblemen, and noblewomen come to pay homage to Arthur and to try to get his attention, as he, is a new successful king who did a miracle, pulling the sword out of stone, and also he's defeated many much older enemies while still a teenager. This illustration is not actually an illustration of this period. You can see he looks pretty old. But one of the nobles who came to visit Arthur and try to get his attention was named Leonors, and he sent his daughter to meet Arthur. Arthur saw her and was overwhelmed by her beauty. She also loved him. And you can guess, that's right, her name was Sanum. It wasn't Guinevere. It was a different girl. And the two of them spend the night together, and she has a baby whose name is Bor, which an awful name for a baby, but okay. And that baby would grow up to be a Knight of the Round Table, but not an important one. So what happens then is Arthur receives word from his ally Leodegrance in Cameliard, which you can see is here, also in Wales. This whole red part is Wales. You can see Cornwall down here. This is the England part. Scotland is up here, so here's Wales. Cameliard is there. This map might be from a video game. I don't know. But anyway, that's where Cameliard. It's not a real place, so it doesn't matter. But it's in Wales somewhere. But Cameliard was being besieged by the King of West Britain. So Arthur and his boys, Ban and Bors, go and basically win the entire battle for Leodegrance, because they're really strong, and they beat them. And so Leodegrance is really happy. He throws a giant feast in their honor, and it is at this feast that Arthur first lays eyes on Leodegrance's daughter and falls immediately in love, and her name is... Yeah, it's Guinevere this time. This time it's Guinevere. So, however, they don't get together yet. They're still not together. But this is when he meets her, and this is when he falls in love with Guinevere. So, following this big celebration of rescuing Cameliard, Ban and Bors go back home to France, and it's at this time the 11 kings have gotten home and found their lands full of invading Saracens. And they realized that if they, like Leodegrance, had sided with Arthur, that he would be helping them the way that he had helped Cameliard, and their lands could have been freed of invaders, no problem. Womp womp. Bad news for them. But even as these 11 kings battle to drive the Saracens out of their own lands, their minds never drift too far from thoughts of revenge against Arthur for the Battle of Bedegraine. When Arthur returns home returns home to Caerleon, he's visited by King Lot's wife, whose name is Morgause. A lot of modern adaptations pronounce it Morgause, which is fine. That's closer to how it's spelled, Morgause, or sometimes with a W instead of a U. It is originally pronounced Morgause, Morgause, whatever. You can see young Arthur and Morgause here in the BBC adaptation of the show Merlin, which is not a very accurate representation of the contents of traditional Arthurian myth, but that's okay. There are infinity versions of all of these stories, and none of them are the same. So if they wanted to make Arthur and Merlin the same age, and whatever. Okay. Anyway, but my point is this is Morgause. There's what she looks like. That's what she looked like in real life. Morgause comes with the 4 sons that she has with King Lot, who are named Gawain, Gaheris, Agravain, and Gareth. You might recognize some of those names, at least. I hope you recognize Gawain. Morgause says that she's come to Caerleon to visit Arthur on an official visit, state business, but really she's there to spy on King Arthur to try and give useful information to her husband, King Lot. However, while she's there, she falls in love with Arthur, and he falls in love with her. That's right, that is the third woman with whom Arthur has fallen in love in 3 paragraphs, basically. The 2 of them become lovers. She stays for a month, during which time she conceives a child. And if me saying that makes your brain itch, or if you feel icky hearing me say that, that just means that you've been paying attention, so that's good. If you didn't have a reaction, I'll explain it later. After Morgause and her sons leave, Arthur has a terrible nightmare in which his kingdom is overrun by terrible beasts like snakes and griffins and other monsters. And he manages to drive these monsters out, but only with great physical exertion and grievous wounds to himself. So once he wakes up from this nightmare, which is, I will tell you, foreshadowing, Arthur can't get back to sleep, so he decides to do what anyone does when they have insomnia. He decides to go hunting, and so he goes out into the forest to clear his mind. And while there, he sees a large white hart, not a white hart, H-E-A-R-T, but a white hart, H-A-R-T, as in a boy deer. He sees a white boy deer, and immediately starts chasing this deer. And he chases him so furiously for so long, for hours upon hours, that eventually his horse dies of exhaustion underneath him, and the hart gets away. There happens to be a woodman working out there who would have been, he would have worked for the king. And he was passing by, and he sees the king, and he says, "Do you want me to bring you another horse?" And he's like, "Yes, please, that would be great. This one died." And so Arthur sits to rest by a fountain, and while he's sitting there, he hears a very strange noise, which sounds like 30 hunting dogs chasing their prey. This turns out to be the questing beast, which you can see here. You can see the young Arthur sitting and resting by the fountain. Here you can see the questing beast drinking from the water. So the questing beast has a head and a neck like a snake. It has the body of a leopard. It has the haunches, kind of the rear legs of a lion, and then its feet are like a hart, again, a boy deer. This description this type of animal almost certainly is based on a misunderstanding of the description of a giraffe. If you think of a giraffe, you can imagine leopard body, long snake-like neck, and then it's got little hooves on its feet, right? Like a giraffe. In fact, the medieval Latin word, the name for a giraffe is a camelopardalis, which combines the word camel, you might have heard it in there, and then pardalis means leopard. So a camel leopard is what they called giraffes. So you can kind of see questing beast, kind of giraffe-esque. It's not quite as random a mishmash of animals as it seems. The name questing beast comes from the sound that it makes. That sound from its belly of 30 dogs yapping after their quarry. That's an old-timey meaning of the word to quest. Quest was the sound that dogs made while chasing after whatever they're supposed to be getting, foxes or rabbits or whatever. It is related to the more traditional idea of a quest, something that you are seeking for. And so a lot of modern people interpret it that the questing beast is a beast that you quest to capture, which is fair because it is also that, right? So the name is originally the questing beast, and the French name is the bête glotissant, which means the yelping beast. But a lot of people think of it as it's a beast that you quest after, which, like I said, is fair because it was the quest of one King Pellinore. And King Pellinore is a knight, and at this point he comes by and he finds Arthur sleeping by the fountain. Apparently he was not that freaked out by the giant crazy monster that just came by and drank some water and walked away. So Pellinore wakes up Arthur and he says, "Hey man, did you see a crazy monster go by?" And Arthur was like, "Yeah, dude, I did in fact see a giant crazy monster go by. It had a snake head and a leopard body, and its legs were like lions, and then it had boy deer feet." And Pellinore's like, "Man, that was definitely the questing beast, or someone that looked a lot like the questing beast." And Pellinore explains that, in fact, it is his quest. It is not just his quest, but the quest of his whole familial line. It is his ancestral duty and his destiny to chase down this animal either until he captures it or until he himself dies. And at that point, the duty passes on to his next of kin. And so he can't ever stop hunting this thing until either he catches it or dies. And even still, he apparently still finds time to fight jousts with other knights. We'll talk about that in a second. But Just then, the woodman, who you remember went to go fetch a horse for Arthur, comes in with the horse, and Pellinore's like, "Thanks for the horse, bro." And he takes it, and as he's riding off, Arthur is like, "That was my horse. I might challenge you for that." And Pellinore's like, "Nah, it's my horse anyway. Um, but if you want to fight, you can generally find me at this fountain. So, catch me at this fountain at 4 o'clock if you want a butt kicking," basically, is what he says. And he rides off after the questing beast. So Arthur, completely perplexed by the thing that has just happened, is still sitting by the fountain when suddenly a young teen boy of about 14, he shows up and he tells Arthur, "Hey man, I know what you're thinking." And Arthur's like, "Do you? Because I barely know what I'm thinking." And he's like, "No, I know all of your thoughts, just as I know that you're a fool, and I know that you don't know that your real father is Uther Pendragon, and your real mother is Igraine, the wife of Duke Gorlois, and you don't know that you are actually the son of the former king." And Arthur starts yelling at him, and he's like, "You're lying. Also, you're basically a baby. What do you know about anything?" Which is a weird thing for Arthur, who was also a teenager at the time, to say. He would have been like 16, so it's weird for him to shout at a 14-year-old and say, "You're an idiot." Although, actually, now that I think about being in high school, that's not unusual at all. If you are a junior, you probably think every freshman is the dummy of the world. So delete what I just said from your brain. It makes total sense. So the boy runs off, and then suddenly, from behind the same tree, suddenly comes an old man with a very wise look on his face, and he comes out, and Arthur's like, now this is the guy I want to get advice from. And so the old man says, "Hey, you know that boy that you just yelled at? He was right, and in fact, your father is Uther, and your mother is Igraine, and if you do a little bit of math on that, you know that Igraine has 3 daughters, Morgan, Elaine, and Morgause. Yes, you did just make a baby with your half-sister. That's correct. Put that one together, Art. And she's going to have a baby, and that baby's going to be named Mordred, and Mordred is going to cause the downfall of your entire kingdom, and also your death. Mordred will cause your death. So if you're feeling bummed, you should." Arthur freaks out a little bit, and it probably won't surprise you at this point to know that both the young teen and the old man were both Merlin in disguise, who was coming to give more advice to his young pupil. And Merlin says, "You know what? I know the thing that I just told you is really rough. I told you that your kingdom's going to fall. I told you that you're going to be killed by your own son, who you didn't even want to have, that you had with a woman you didn't even know was your sister, and now you just found out your father was Uther, who was kind of a jerk, and all that stuff. I know that's bad, but let me tell you something. My own fate is worse. At least you are going to die in glorious battle. I am going to die by being buried alive for hundreds of years." And all of those things turned out to be true because Merlin is a good prophet. And so that is where we will leave off for today, after these early challenges of King Arthur as a teen. And we'll pick up from there. And next time we'll talk about Arthur meeting up with Pellinore again, Arthur actually getting together with Guinevere, and other things. We'll talk about where the round table comes from and all that stuff. So, see you next time. Stay safe out there.